Lieutenant Marcus Hawk Rodriguez had been flying F-16s for 8 years, but nothing had prepared him for the events that would unfold over the Nevada desert that Tuesday morning. The squadron of 6 jets had been conducting routine training exercises when their communications suddenly went dark. Every radio frequency turned to static. Every backup system failed simultaneously. In the eerie silence of the cockpit, Marcus could only hear the steady hum of his engine and his own breathing through the oxygen mask. The formation had been practicing combat maneuvers at 30,000 feet when the blackout occurred. Marcus watched his wingman, Captain Jessica Phoenix Thompson, through his canopy as she gestured frantically, trying to communicate through hand signals. The other 4 pilots in their formation were equally confused, their jets maintaining formation purely through visual contact. This wasn't just equipment failure. This was something else entirely. Marcus had experienced radio malfunctions before, but never across an entire squadron simultaneously. The timing was suspicious, occurring exactly 17 minutes after they had entered restricted airspace designated as Training Zone Alpha 7. Command had assured them the area was clear, but now Marcus wondered if they had stumbled into something they weren't supposed to see. The silence stretched on for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. Marcus checked his instruments repeatedly. Everything appeared normal except for the complete communications blackout. His fuel levels were stable, engines running smoothly, and all navigation systems functional. Whatever was causing the radio silence wasn't affecting the aircraft's primary systems. Then, cutting through the static like a knife through silk, came a voice. Not through the radio that remained dead, but somehow directly into his headset. It was barely a whisper, so faint Marcus initially thought he was imagining it. The voice was familiar, impossibly familiar, and it made his blood run cold. "Hawk, can you hear me?" The words were distorted, as if coming from a great distance or through water. Marcus felt his heart rate spike as he recognized the voice of his former squadron leader, Colonel David Reaper Morrison. The same Colonel Morrison who had been shot down over hostile territory 18 months ago. The same Morrison whose body was never recovered. The same Morrison who had been declared killed in action and whose funeral Marcus had attended. Marcus's hands trembled on the controls as the whisper continued. "Something's wrong here, Hawk. You need to get out of this airspace. Now." The voice faded in and out, like a radio signal from another dimension. Marcus looked around frantically at his squadron mates, but their body language suggested they were still dealing with normal radio silence. "Reaper," Marcus whispered into his microphone, knowing it was useless with the communications down. "Is that really you?" The only response was static, then another faint whisper that chilled him to the bone. "They're not who you think they are, Marcus. Trust no one when you land." Captain Jessica Thompson was the first to notice something was wrong with her wingman. Through her canopy, she could see Marcus's F-16 beginning to deviate from formation, making subtle course corrections that took him away from their designated flight path. His aircraft was still maintaining proper altitude and speed, but his heading was gradually shifting toward the eastern edge of their training zone. Jessica had flown with Marcus for 3 years and knew his flying style intimately. He was methodical, precise, and never deviated from flight plans without good reason. What she was seeing now was completely out of character. She tried using hand signals to get his attention, but Marcus seemed focused on something else entirely, his helmet turning left and right as if he was looking for something in the empty sky. The communications blackout had lasted exactly 23 minutes when Jessica noticed the first anomaly on her radar. A brief blip appeared at the edge of her screen, too small to be another aircraft but too large to be a bird. It appeared for exactly 3 seconds before vanishing completely. She checked her instruments twice, but there was no malfunction indicator. Whatever had briefly appeared on her radar was real. The other pilots in the formation were maintaining their positions, but Jessica could see the confusion in their body language. Captain Rodriguez, call sign Viper, was constantly checking his instruments and looking around nervously. Lieutenant Sarah Falcon Mitchell was making repeated attempts to contact ground control, her hand movements indicating she was cycling through every available frequency. Then Jessica heard it, a sound that made no sense in the context of military aviation. It was music, faint and distorted, coming through her headset despite the communications blackout. The melody was hauntingly familiar, something she had heard before but couldn't quite place. It wasn't coming through any radio frequency she recognized, and it seemed to be transmitted directly into her helmet's audio system. The music grew slightly louder, and Jessica realized it was a song that had been Colonel Morrison's favorite, Time by Pink Floyd. Morrison had played it constantly in the squadron ready room, claiming it reminded him of home. The coincidence was too strange to ignore, especially considering the timing of the communications failure and their current location in restricted airspace. Jessica's training told her to focus on the mission and maintain formation, but her instincts were screaming that something was terribly wrong. She had heard rumors about experimental military technology being tested in this area, projects that were classified above her security clearance. The complete communications blackout, the strange radar contacts, and now the impossible music transmission were painting a picture that made her increasingly uncomfortable. As the music continued, Jessica began to hear what sounded like voices mixed in with the melody, whispers that seemed to be calling out names of squadron members. She heard Phoenix, repeated several times, then Hawk and Viper. The voices were distorted and ethereal, but they carried an urgent tone that made her skin crawl. The third pilot to experience the anomaly was Captain Diego Viper Rodriguez, no relation to Marcus despite the shared surname. Diego was the squadron's electronics warfare specialist, and his F-16 was equipped with additional sensor equipment that made him acutely aware of electromagnetic anomalies. What he was detecting now defied every principle of physics and electronic warfare he had learned in his 12-year career. His electronic countermeasures equipment was picking up signals that shouldn't exist, frequencies that were simultaneously too high and too low for conventional radio equipment, transmissions that seemed to be coming from multiple directions at once. The signals were weak but persistent, and they were somehow penetrating the communications blackout that had affected their standard radio equipment. Diego's specialized training had exposed him to classified information about experimental military technology, but nothing in his briefings had prepared him for what he was experiencing now. The signal patterns were unlike anything produced by known American, Russian, or Chinese military equipment. They seemed almost organic in nature, pulsing with a rhythm that reminded him of a heartbeat. As Diego monitored the anomalous signals, he began to notice patterns in the data that suggested intelligence behind the transmissions. The signals were not random. They were responding to the squadron's movements, intensifying when the aircraft changed course and diminishing when they maintained steady flight. Whatever was generating these signals was aware of their presence and was actively tracking their formation. The electronic warfare equipment also detected what appeared to be multiple radar signatures that didn't correspond to any known aircraft. These contacts appeared and disappeared randomly, never staying on screen long enough for a proper identification. Diego's training told him these might be stealth aircraft, but their flight characteristics were unlike anything in any military's inventory. Then Diego heard the voice, clear and unmistakable despite the communications blackout. It was Colonel Morrison, and he was calling Diego's name. "Viper, this is Reaper. Can you hear me?" The voice was coming through the secure tactical frequency that only squadron members would know, the frequency that had been changed after Morrison's death as part of standard security protocols. Diego's blood ran cold as he realized the implications. Either Colonel Morrison was somehow still alive and transmitting from an unknown location, or someone had access to highly classified communication protocols and was using them for purposes Diego couldn't begin to understand. Neither possibility was reassuring. "Reaper, this is Viper. How are you transmitting? What's your location?" Diego spoke into his microphone, knowing that his own communications equipment was still down, but hopping against hope that somehow Morrison could hear him. The response came immediately, but it wasn't what Diego expected to hear. "Lieutenant Sarah, Falcon." Mitchell was the youngest pilot in the formation, but her sharp instincts had kept her alive through 2 combat deployments. She had been monitoring her instruments obsessively since the communications blackout began, and she was the first to notice that their GPS systems were beginning to show inconsistent readings. According to her navigation equipment, their formation was simultaneously in 3 different locations: the correct position over Nevada, somewhere above the Pacific Ocean, and impossibly in restricted airspace over a classified facility in New Mexico. The GPS readings were fluctuating every few seconds, making it impossible to determine their actual position with any certainty. Sarah's training had taught her to trust her instruments, but when instruments contradicted each other, she had to fall back on visual navigation. The problem was that the landscape below them didn't match what should have been visible from their supposed position. Instead of the familiar Nevada desert, she was seeing terrain that looked more like the mountains of Colorado or Wyoming. The spatial disorientation was making Sarah increasingly anxious. Her inner ear was telling her the aircraft was level, but her eyes were seeing a horizon that seemed to tilt and shift subtly. She had experienced vertigo before, but this was different. It felt like reality itself was becoming unstable. Then Sarah heard her father's voice. Master Sergeant Robert Mitchell had been killed in a training accident when Sarah was 16, but now she could hear him clearly through her headset, offering the same encouragement he had given her during her first flying lessons. "You're doing great, sweetheart. Just trust your instincts and keep flying." The voice was impossible, but it was undeniably her father's. Sarah felt tears welling up in her eyes as she heard the man who had inspired her to become a pilot speaking to her from beyond the grave. The emotional impact was overwhelming, but underneath the grief and confusion, Sarah's analytical mind was trying to process what was happening. Sarah had top-secret clearance and had been briefed on various experimental military projects, but nothing she knew about could explain the phenomena they were experiencing. The combination of communications interference, GPS anomalies, and now apparent audio hallucinations suggested something far beyond conventional technology. As her father's voice continued, Sarah began to notice that the other pilots in the formation were exhibiting increasingly erratic behavior. Marcus was still deviating from course. Jessica was making unnecessary altitude adjustments, and Diego was constantly manipulating his electronic equipment. Whatever was affecting their squadron was getting stronger. "Dad, if you can hear me, I need to know what's happening to us," Sarah whispered into her microphone. The response came immediately, but it wasn't comforting. "You're not where you think you are, Sarah. And the people who sent you here aren't who you think they are." The fifth pilot, Captain Michael Eagle Thompson, Jessica's younger brother, was experiencing the most disturbing phenomena of all. His F-16's heads-up display was showing impossible information, aircraft that weren't there, waypoints that led to locations that didn't exist, and targeting data for objects that his eyes couldn't see. Michael had always been the most technically minded of the squadron, with a degree in aerospace engineering and a deep understanding of the F-16 systems. What he was seeing now violated every principle of avionics and computer programming he had ever learned. The aircraft's computer systems were generating data that couldn't possibly be real, yet all diagnostic tests showed the equipment was functioning normally. The heads-up display was showing what appeared to be a massive structure directly ahead of their formation, something the size of a small city floating in the air. The structure was depicted in perfect detail, with multiple levels, defensive systems, and what looked like docking bays for aircraft. Yet when Michael looked through his canopy, he saw only empty sky. Michael's engineering background told him that the aircraft's computer systems were either experiencing a catastrophic malfunction or were being fed false data from an external source. Either scenario was extremely dangerous, but the precision and complexity of the false data suggested something far more sophisticated than a simple system failure. Then Michael heard his deceased grandfather's voice, clear as day through the communication system. Grandpa Thompson had been a World War II pilot, shot down over Germany in 1944. The voice was exactly as Michael remembered it from childhood visits, gravelly from years of smoking, and filled with the same warmth and humor that had made him Michael's childhood hero. "Mickey, you need to listen to me carefully," his grandfather's voice said, using the childhood nickname only family members knew. "What you're seeing isn't real, but it's also not entirely fake. Someone is using very advanced technology to show you things that exist in a different place and time. You need to break formation and get out of there before it's too late." Michael felt his hands shaking on the controls as his grandfather's voice continued. "The people who sent your squadron into this area know exactly what's happening. They're using you as test subjects for something they don't fully understand. Trust Marcus. He's hearing from Morrison, and Morrison is trying to warn you all." The words hit Michael like a physical blow. The idea that their own command structure might be knowingly exposing them to dangerous experimental technology was almost too horrifying to contemplate. But as he looked at his instrument readings and compared them to the impossible things he was seeing, Michael realized his grandfather might be telling the truth. The sixth and final pilot, Captain Robert Ace Wilson, was the squadron's most experienced aviator with over 15 years of flight time. His experience told him that they were in serious danger, but he couldn't identify the specific threat they were facing. The combination of system failures and anomalous readings suggested either a massive equipment malfunction or the presence of unknown technology. Robert's F-16 was equipped with the most advanced sensor suite in the squadron, and what his equipment was detecting made no sense according to conventional physics. There were electromagnetic signatures that seemed to be coming from everywhere and nowhere, gravitational anomalies that should have been affecting their flight characteristics, but weren't, and energy readings that suggested the presence of power sources larger than anything in the known military inventory. Robert had been flying when the September 11 attacks occurred, and he had experienced the confusion and disorientation that came with suddenly being in a combat situation on home soil. What he was feeling now was similar but magnified tenfold. The familiar sky had become alien territory, and every instinct developed over years of military flying was screaming warnings. Then Robert heard the voice of his former instructor, Lieutenant Colonel James "Hawk" Peterson, who had died in a car accident 5 years earlier. Peterson had been like a father to Robert, teaching him not just how to fly, but how to think like a military aviator. The voice was unmistakable, carrying the same authority and calm confidence that had guided Robert through his early years as a pilot. "Ace, this is Hawk Peterson. You need to take command of your squadron and get them out of there immediately. What you're experiencing is not natural, and it's not entirely under human control. The technology being used has unpredictable effects on both aircraft systems and human consciousness." Robert felt a chill run down his spine as Peterson's voice continued. "The people who authorized this mission know the risks, but they consider your squadron expendable. They're using you to test something they've found, something that doesn't belong to any human military. You need to make a decision right now. Follow orders and risk losing your entire squadron, or break protocol and save your people." The choice was clear, but the implications were staggering. Robert was being asked to commit mutiny based on the voice of a dead man transmitted through impossible technology. Yet everything he was seeing and experiencing suggested that Peterson was telling the truth about the danger they were facing. Robert made his decision and began using hand signals to gather his squadron's attention, preparing to lead them out of the restricted airspace regardless of their orders. As he did, he noticed that all 6 aircraft were now showing identical anomalous readings, and the voices were becoming stronger and more urgent. Marcus was the first to see Robert's hand signals indicating an emergency formation change. Despite the confusion and fear caused by Morrison's warnings, Marcus felt a surge of relief at seeing his squadron leader taking control of the situation. The voices they were hearing might be impossible, but the danger was clearly real. As the squadron began to adjust course under Robert's leadership, Marcus noticed that his communication equipment was starting to show signs of life. Brief bursts of static were coming through, occasionally carrying fragments of normal radio traffic. Whatever was causing the communications blackout was beginning to weaken, but the voices of the dead remained crystal clear. Morrison's voice came through Marcus's headset again, more urgent than before. "Hawk, they're trying to pull you deeper into the phenomenon. The longer you stay in this area, the harder it will be to get out. Some of the other test subjects never made it back to normal reality." The words "other test subjects" hit Marcus like a physical blow. If Morrison was telling the truth, then their squadron wasn't the first to be sent into this area. How many other pilots had been exposed to these phenomena? How many had suffered permanent effects or worse? Marcus keyed his microphone again, hopping against hope that Morrison could hear him. "Reaper, what happened to you? Are you still alive?" The response came immediately, but it was fragmentary and distorted. "Define alive, Hawk. I'm somewhere else. Still flying, but not in the way you understand. The technology they found, it doesn't just affect aircraft. It affects consciousness itself." The implications were staggering. If Morrison was somehow still conscious after being declared dead, existing in some altered state created by experimental technology, then the military had access to something that transcended conventional science. The question was whether they understood what they were dealing with, or were simply experimenting blindly. As the squadron continued to change course under Robert's leadership, Marcus noticed that the landscape below them was beginning to shift and change. The Nevada desert was being replaced by what looked like an alien landscape, with structures that defied conventional architecture and skies that showed unfamiliar constellations, despite the fact that it was still daylight. Marcus realized that they weren't just dealing with advanced technology. They were dealing with something that could alter their perception of reality itself. The voices of the dead might be real, or they might be elaborate psychological manipulations designed to test their responses to extreme stress and confusion. Jessica was following Robert's lead, adjusting her course to match the squadron's new heading, when she noticed that her fuel gauge was showing impossible readings. According to her instruments, her fuel levels were simultaneously at full capacity and critically low. The contradiction was making it impossible to determine how much flight time she had remaining. The music in her headset was growing stronger, and Jessica could now clearly hear Colonel Morrison's voice mixed in with the Pink Floyd melody. He was speaking directly to her, using her real name instead of her call sign. "Jessica, this is Dave Morrison. I need you to listen carefully. The technology you're encountering isn't human in origin. The military found it, but they don't understand it." Jessica felt her heart racing as Morrison's voice continued. "The phenomenon affects different people in different ways. Some experience temporal displacement, others see alternate realities, and some are able to communicate across dimensional barriers. What you're hearing right now is real, but it's not coming from the same reality you started in." The concept of dimensional barriers was something Jessica had encountered in science fiction, but hearing it described by her former squadron leader in the context of their current situation was terrifying. If Morrison was telling the truth, then they weren't just dealing with advanced technology. They were dealing with something that could manipulate the fundamental nature of reality itself. Jessica's training as a military pilot had prepared her for many scenarios, but nothing had prepared her for the possibility that their own command structure might be knowingly exposing them to otherworldly phenomena. The idea that they were being used as test subjects for something beyond human understanding was almost too horrifying to accept. As she continued to monitor her instruments, Jessica noticed that her radar was now showing multiple contacts that appeared to be following their formation. The contacts were maintaining a perfect distance and altitude, matching every course change the squadron made. Whatever was tracking them was demonstrating capabilities far beyond any known aircraft. Morrison's voice came through again, more urgent than before. Jessica, you need to convince your squadron to break radio silence as soon as your communications come back online. There are people at your base who are working with the forces behind this phenomenon. They'll try to debrief you individually and alter your memories of what happened here. The warning about memory alteration sent a chill through Jessica. If their own command structure was planning to manipulate their memories, then preserving their collective account of events was crucial. They needed to maintain their individual testimonies and compare notes before anyone could interfere with their recollections. Diego's electronic warfare equipment was now detecting energy signatures that defied every principle of physics he had ever learned. The readings suggested the presence of power sources that were generating more energy than should be possible with any known technology. The emissions were also following patterns that seemed to respond to the squadron's thoughts and emotions. Diego had been trained to detect and counter electronic warfare attacks, but what he was experiencing now was beyond anything covered in his training. The energy signatures weren't just jamming their communications. They were somehow interfacing directly with their aircraft's computer systems, and possibly with their own neural activity. Morrison's voice came through Diego's headset with crystal clarity. Viper, your specialized equipment is picking up signatures from technology that exists partially outside normal space-time. The energy sources you're detecting are real, but they're not entirely located in your current reality. The concept of technology existing partially outside normal space-time was beyond Diego's understanding, but the precision of Morrison's description of his equipment readings suggested that the voice was accessing real-time information about his aircraft systems. Whatever was communicating with them had detailed knowledge of their capabilities and current status. Diego's instruments were also showing that their squadron was being scanned by multiple sources, using techniques that didn't match any known military technology. The scans were incredibly detailed, apparently mapping not just their aircraft but their physiological responses, and possibly their thoughts themselves. Morrison's voice continued. The technology interfaces with human consciousness in ways that the military doesn't fully understand. They're using your squadron to test its effects on trained pilots, but they don't know how to reverse the process if something goes wrong. Some of the previous test subjects are still missing, existing in alternate states of reality. The revelation that other pilots were missing and possibly trapped in alternate realities was the most disturbing information Diego had received. If Morrison was telling the truth, then their squadron was participating in an experiment that had already claimed casualties, and their command structure was willing to sacrifice more pilots to gather additional data. Diego made the decision to begin recording everything his electronic warfare equipment was detecting. If they survived this encounter, they would need evidence of what they had experienced. The recorded data might be the only way to prove that they had been exposed to technology beyond human understanding. Sarah's GPS system was now showing their position as constantly changing, placing them in dozens of different locations simultaneously. According to her navigation equipment, they were flying over Nevada, New Mexico, Colorado, and several locations that didn't correspond to any known geography. The readings were so chaotic that conventional navigation was becoming impossible. Her father's voice came through her headset again, offering guidance that seemed to come from beyond death itself. Sarah, the technology you're encountering can manipulate perception of time and space. What you're experiencing is real, but it's happening across multiple realities simultaneously. You need to trust your instincts and stay focused on getting home. The idea that they were experiencing multiple realities simultaneously was mind-bending, but it explained the contradictory readings from their instruments. Their aircraft might be physically in one location, while their consciousness was experiencing events in others. The phenomenon was beyond anything covered in their training or briefings. Sarah's father's voice continued. The people who sent you here have access to something they found, something that doesn't belong to human civilization. They're using it to conduct experiments on military personnel, but they don't understand the long-term effects. Some of the test subjects have been permanently altered by the experience. The warning about permanent alterations was terrifying. Sarah realized that they might not be able to return to their normal lives even if they survived this encounter. The technology they were experiencing might leave lasting effects on their consciousness or their ability to perceive reality normally. As Sarah continued to monitor her instruments, She noticed that her aircraft's computer systems were beginning to show signs of autonomous operation. The F-16 was making subtle adjustments to its flight path without her input, as if it was being guided by an external intelligence. The controls were still responding to her commands, but the aircraft seemed to have developed its own agenda. Her father's voice came through again with a warning that made her blood run cold. "Sarah, your aircraft is being influenced by the same technology that's affecting your communications. Don't trust the autopilot systems, and be prepared to take manual control if necessary. The technology can override your aircraft systems if you're not careful." Sarah immediately switched to full manual control, disabling all automated systems. The action felt like a small victory against whatever forces were manipulating their squadron, but she knew that the real battle was just beginning. Michael's heads-up display was now showing detailed technical specifications for the impossible structure he had been seeing. According to his aircraft's computer systems, the structure was over 10 miles long and composed of materials that didn't exist in any known periodic table. The level of detail was extraordinary, suggesting that his aircraft was somehow interfacing with the structure's own systems. His grandfather's voice came through with information that challenged everything Michael thought he knew about military technology. "Mickey, what you're seeing is real, but it exists in a different dimensional phase. The military found a way to access it, but they don't understand how it works. They're using your squadron to test whether human consciousness can interface with the structure's systems." The concept of dimensional phases was beyond Michael's engineering background, but the precision of his aircraft's sensor readings suggested that he was somehow accessing real technical data about an actual structure. The question was whether the structure existed in their reality, or in some alternate dimension that they were being given access to. Michael's grandfather continued, "The structure is a form of technology that was left behind by a civilization that existed in multiple dimensions simultaneously. The military found a way to detect it, but they don't know how to control it. They're using pilots like you to see if human consciousness can learn to interface with it safely." The revelation that they might be interfacing with alien technology was staggering. Michael realized that their squadron might be participating in first contact with an extraterrestrial civilization, but through methods that their own command structure didn't fully understand or control. As Michael continued to analyze the technical data appearing on his displays, he noticed that the information was beginning to make sense on an intuitive level. His engineering training was somehow allowing him to understand the structure's design principles, even though they were based on physics that shouldn't exist. His grandfather's voice came through again with a warning. "Mickey, the technology is designed to interface with consciousness itself. The more you understand it, the more it will change you. Some of the other test subjects have been so altered by the experience that they can no longer function in normal reality. Michael realized that he was facing a choice between gaining incredible knowledge and preserving his humanity. The technology was offering him insights into the fundamental nature of reality itself, but at the cost of his ability to exist normally in the world he had known. Robert was leading the squadron through a series of evasive maneuvers, trying to break free from whatever was tracking them, when he noticed that their formation was being shadowed by aircraft that appeared on radar but were invisible to the naked eye. The contacts were maintaining perfect formation with his squadron, matching every move with impossible precision. Peterson's voice came through Robert's headset with tactical information. "Ace, the contacts you're seeing are real aircraft, but they're not entirely in your reality. They're operating in a dimensional phase that allows them to observe you without being fully visible. The technology enables them to exist in multiple realities simultaneously." The concept of aircraft operating in multiple realities was beyond Robert's understanding, but his radar signatures were clear and consistent. Whatever was shadowing them was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything in any known military inventory. The aircraft were somehow able to exist in a state that made them partially invisible while maintaining full operational capability. Peterson's voice continued. "The military has been reverse engineering this technology for several years, but they haven't been able to fully control it. They're using your squadron to test whether human pilots can learn to operate in multiple dimensional phases simultaneously." Robert realized that they might be participating in the development of the next generation of military aircraft, but through methods that put their lives and sanity at risk. The technology could revolutionize military aviation, but the human cost might be too high to justify its development. As Robert continued to lead his squadron through evasive maneuvers, he noticed that their aircraft were beginning to exhibit capabilities they shouldn't possess. The F-16s were responding to his commands with impossible agility, making turns and climbs that should have exceeded their design limitations. The technology was somehow enhancing their aircraft's performance. Peterson's voice came through again with a warning. "Ace, the technology is integrating with your aircraft systems. The enhanced performance you're experiencing is real, but it comes at a cost. The aircraft will be permanently altered by the experience, and so will you." Robert realized that they were being changed by their encounter with the technology, possibly in ways that would make it impossible for them to return to normal military service. The squadron that had entered this airspace might not be the same squadron that emerged from it. The communications blackout suddenly ended with a burst of static that nearly deafened all 6 pilots. Their radios came back online simultaneously, flooding their headsets with urgent transmissions from their base. Ground control was frantically trying to locate them, reporting that they had disappeared from radar for over an hour. Marcus was the first to respond, his voice shaking as he keyed his microphone. "Tower, this is Hawk. We're okay. Experiencing some unusual phenomena out here, requesting immediate return to base." The response from ground control was immediate and sharp. "Negative, Hawk. You are ordered to continue your mission in Training Zone Alpha 7. Repeat, you are ordered to remain in restricted airspace." The order to remain in the dangerous airspace confirmed Morrison's warnings about their own command structure. Someone at their base was deliberately keeping them exposed to the phenomena, treating them as expendable test subjects. Marcus felt a surge of anger and betrayal as he realized that his own military was putting his squadron at risk for experimental purposes. Morrison's voice came through Marcus's headset again, overlaying the ground control transmissions. "Hawk, don't trust those orders. The people giving them aren't the same people who sent you out this morning. The technology has the ability to mimic voices and personalities. They're trying to keep you in the test area longer." The revelation that the technology could mimic human voices was terrifying. If Morrison was telling the truth, then the ground control transmissions might be generated by the same force that was creating the impossible phenomena they were experiencing. They couldn't trust any communications from their base. Marcus made the decision to ignore the orders and continue leading his squadron toward home. "Tower, this is Hawk. We have multiple aircraft emergencies and are declaring an emergency. We're returning to base immediately." The response was angry and threatening. "Hawk, you are ordered to remain in position. Failure to comply will result in court-martial." The threat of court-martial was real, but Marcus knew that court-martial was preferable to losing his entire squadron to experimental technology. He continued to lead his formation away from the restricted airspace, trusting that the other pilots would follow his lead despite the consequences they might face. Jessica was monitoring the communications between Marcus and ground control when she noticed that the transmissions were exhibiting subtle anomalies. The voice patterns were correct, but there were slight delays and distortions that suggested the transmissions might be artificially generated rather than coming from human operators. Morrison's voice came through her headset with confirmation of her suspicions. "Jessica, the ground control transmissions are being generated by the same technology that's creating the other phenomena. The real ground control lost contact with you over an hour ago. They're probably searching for you right now." The idea that their ground control was being impersonated by alien technology was almost too bizarre to accept, but the evidence was mounting. The orders to remain in dangerous airspace, the threatening tone, and the technical anomalies all suggested that they were being manipulated by forces beyond human understanding. Jessica keyed her microphone to support Marcus's decision. "Tower, this is Phoenix. Confirming multiple aircraft emergencies. We're declaring squadron emergency and returning to base immediately." The response was immediate and filled with static. "Phoenix, you are ordered to maintain radio silence and continue your mission." The order to maintain radio silence while continuing their mission was contradictory and suspicious. Real ground control would want constant communication during an emergency, not radio silence. Jessica realized that they were being ordered to cut off communication so that the technology could continue its experiments without interference. As Jessica continued to monitor the communications, she noticed that the fake ground control was beginning to use personal information about the squadron members, mentioning details about their families and personal lives that should have been confidential. The level of detail suggested that the technology had access to classified military personnel files. Morrison's voice came through again with a warning. "Jessica, the technology can access human databases and memory banks. It knows everything about you and your squadron. Don't trust any personal information it uses to try to manipulate you." Diego's electronic warfare equipment was detecting massive data transfers between unknown sources and what appeared to be military databases. The transfers were happening at speeds that exceeded any known computer network, suggesting that the technology was accessing information through methods that didn't rely on conventional data transmission. The data transfers included detailed information about the squadron's personnel files, mission histories, and psychological profiles. Whatever was communicating with them had access to classified information that should have been secured against any external intrusion. The breach of security was staggering in its scope and implications. Morrison's voice came through Diego's headset with technical details. "Viper, the technology interfaces with human information systems through quantum entanglement. It can access any database that has ever been connected to a network, regardless of security measures. The military doesn't understand how it works, but they're trying to learn." The concept of quantum entanglement being used for data access was beyond Diego's understanding, but the evidence was clear in his equipment readings. The technology was demonstrating capabilities that exceeded anything in human science, accessing information through methods that couldn't be countered by conventional security measures. Diego realized that if the technology could access military databases, it might also be able to access the personal information of everyone connected to those databases. The implications for national security were staggering, yet their own command structure seemed to be allowing the access to continue in order to study the phenomenon. As Diego continued to monitor the data transfers, he noticed that the technology was also accessing real-time information about the squadron's current status, including their physiological responses and emotional states. The level of monitoring was invasive and comprehensive, suggesting that they were being studied like laboratory subjects. Morrison's voice came through again with a warning that made Diego's blood run cold. Viper, the technology is learning from everything it accesses. Every piece of information it gathers makes it more capable of manipulating human systems. Your squadron is helping it learn how to interface with human consciousness. Sarah was maintaining manual control of her aircraft when she noticed that her navigation systems were beginning to show their true position. According to her instruments, they were now flying over familiar Nevada terrain, but the readings were fluctuating as if they were moving between different realities. Her father's voice came through with guidance. Sarah, you're transitioning between dimensional phases. The technology exists in multiple realities simultaneously, and it's been showing you glimpses of different versions of your world. Stay focused on getting home to your reality. The concept of multiple realities was mind-bending, but Sarah's navigation equipment was providing evidence that they had indeed been experiencing something beyond normal physics. The fluctuating readings suggested that they were somehow existing in multiple locations simultaneously, experiencing events across different versions of reality. Sarah's father continued. The military found a way to access these alternate realities, but they don't understand the consequences. Some of the test subjects have become permanently displaced, existing in multiple realities simultaneously. You need to focus on your original reality and reject any attempts to pull you into alternate versions. Sarah felt a growing sense of urgency as she realized that their encounter with the technology might have permanent consequences. If her father was telling the truth, then some pilots had been permanently altered by their exposure to the phenomena, losing their ability to exist normally in a single reality. As Sarah continued to fly manual control, she noticed that her aircraft was responding to her thoughts as much as to her physical control inputs. The F-16 seemed to be anticipating her intentions, making subtle adjustments before she even touched the controls. The interface between her consciousness and the aircraft was becoming unnaturally intimate. Her father's voice came through again with a warning. Sarah, the technology is trying to create a permanent link between your consciousness and your aircraft. Don't let it establish a complete connection, or you'll never be able to separate yourself from the machine. The warning about permanent connection was terrifying. Sarah realized that the enhanced aircraft performance they were experiencing might come at the cost of their humanity. The technology was offering them capabilities beyond normal human limitations, but at the price of their individual consciousness. Michael's heads-up display was now showing technical specifications that he was beginning to understand on an intuitive level. The alien technology was teaching him principles of physics and engineering that exceeded anything in human science. The knowledge was incredibly valuable, but Michael could feel it changing his fundamental understanding of reality. His grandfather's voice came through with a warning. "Mickey, the knowledge the technology is sharing with you is real, but it's also a trap. The more you understand, the more you'll become dependent on the technology to process information. Some of the other test subjects have lost the ability to think without technological assistance." Michael realized that he was facing a choice between gaining incredible knowledge and preserving his independence of thought. The technology was offering him insights that could revolutionize human understanding of physics and engineering, but at the cost of his ability to function as an independent human being. As Michael continued to analyze the technical data, he noticed that his thought processes were becoming more logical and systematic, but also less creative and intuitive. The technology was enhancing his analytical abilities while diminishing his human characteristics. He was becoming more like a computer and less like a person. His grandfather's voice came through again. "Mickey, you need to resist the integration. The technology is designed to merge with consciousness, but it doesn't understand the value of human creativity and intuition. If you let it complete the process, you'll lose everything that makes you human." Michael made the conscious decision to stop analyzing the technical data and focus on maintaining his human perspective. The effort was surprisingly difficult, as if the technology was actively trying to draw his attention back to the fascinating information it was providing. Robert was leading the squadron through a series of complex maneuvers when he noticed that their aircraft were beginning to operate as a single unit. The F-16s were responding to his commands with perfect synchronization, as if they were all connected to a single control system. The level of coordination was impossible with conventional technology. Peterson's voice came through with an explanation. "Ace, the technology is creating a collective consciousness among your squadron. Your aircraft and your minds are being linked together into a single operational unit. It's incredibly effective, but it comes at the cost of individual identity." The concept of collective consciousness was both fascinating and terrifying. Robert could feel the thoughts and emotions of his squadron members as if they were his own. The shared experience was creating a level of tactical coordination that exceeded anything possible with normal human pilots, but it was also erasing the boundaries between individual consciousness. Peterson's voice continued. "The military is interested in the collective consciousness effect because it would revolutionize military operations. but they don't understand that the process is irreversible. The test subjects who have undergone complete integration can never function as individuals again. Robert realized that they were being offered capabilities that could transform military aviation, but at the cost of their individual humanity. The technology was demonstrating the potential for pilots to operate as a collective intelligence, but the price was the loss of personal identity and independent thought. As Robert continued to lead the formation, he noticed that he was beginning to think in terms of we rather than I. The collective consciousness was becoming more dominant, and his individual perspective was being subsumed into the group identity. The process was subtle but unmistakable. Peterson's voice came through again with urgent guidance. Ace, you need to assert your individual consciousness and break the collective link. Focus on your personal identity and your responsibility to your individual squadron members. Don't let the technology erase who you are. The communications between the squadron and ground control were becoming increasingly bizarre. The fake ground control was now using personal information about the pilots' families and relationships, trying to manipulate them emotionally. The level of intimate detail suggested that the technology had access to private communications and personal memories. Marcus was fielding increasingly desperate transmissions from the impersonated ground control. Hawk, your wife Jennifer is worried about you. She's waiting for you to complete your mission and come home safely. Don't let your squadron down by abandoning your duties. The mention of his wife's name and the attempt to use emotional manipulation confirmed that the transmissions were not coming from legitimate military sources. Real ground control would never use personal information in such a manipulative way during an emergency situation. Morrison's voice came through Marcus's headset with confirmation. Hawk, the technology is accessing your personal memories and using them to create psychological pressure. It's trying to make you doubt your decision to leave the test area. Don't trust any emotional appeals that use personal information. Marcus felt anger building as he realized the extent to which the technology was violating their privacy and attempting to manipulate their emotions. The invasion of their personal memories and relationships was a form of psychological warfare that exceeded anything he had experienced in his military career. The fake ground control continued its manipulation. Hawk, you're putting your squadron at risk by disobeying orders. Return to your assigned position immediately or face the consequences. Your family depends on your military career. The threat to his family and career was designed to create fear and compliance, but Marcus recognized the manipulation for what it was. He keyed his microphone with determination. Tower, this is Hawk. We're declaring emergency and returning to base. Stop using personal information to manipulate us. We know you're not legitimate ground control." The response was immediate and filled with static. "Hawk, you are making a serious mistake. The consequences of your actions will follow you for the rest of your career." The transmission then cut to silence, as if the fake ground control had given up its attempts at manipulation. Jessica was monitoring the communications when she noticed that the fake ground control transmissions had stopped completely. The sudden silence was somehow more ominous than the manipulative messages had been. It suggested that the technology had abandoned its attempts at psychological manipulation and was moving to a different strategy. Morrison's voice came through her headset with a warning. "Jessica, the technology is changing tactics. It's going to try to prevent you from leaving the test area by more direct means. Be prepared for interference with your aircraft systems." The warning about direct interference was confirmed almost immediately as Jessica's flight controls began to respond sluggishly. The F-16 was still flying normally, but her control inputs were being filtered through some kind of intermediary system that was adding delay and reducing responsiveness. Jessica switched to emergency control mode, bypassing the normal flight computer systems and relying on direct mechanical linkages between her controls and the aircraft's control surfaces. The action restored normal responsiveness, but it also meant that she was flying without the assistance of the aircraft's automated systems. Morrison's voice came through again. "Jessica, the technology is trying to take control of your aircraft to force you to remain in the test area. Stay in manual control and don't trust any automated systems. The technology can override any computer-controlled function." Jessica realized that they were in a battle for control of their own aircraft. The technology was demonstrating the ability to interfere with military aviation systems, posing a threat not just to their squadron, but to any aircraft that might encounter similar phenomena in the future. As Jessica continued to fly in manual control mode, she noticed that her aircraft was fighting her inputs, trying to turn back toward the restricted airspace. The struggle for control was constant and exhausting, requiring all of her concentration and physical strength to maintain her desired heading. Morrison's voice provided encouragement. "Jessica, you're stronger than the technology. It can influence your aircraft systems, but it can't override human determination and skill. Keep fighting for control and you'll make it home." Diego's electronic warfare equipment was detecting massive energy buildups in the restricted airspace behind them. The readings suggested that the technology was preparing some kind of response to their departure, possibly an attempt to force them to return, or to prevent other aircraft from leaving the area in the future. The energy signatures were unlike anything Diego had ever encountered, suggesting power levels that exceeded anything in the known military inventory. The technology was demonstrating capabilities that could potentially threaten any aircraft that entered its area of influence. Morrison's voice came through Diego's headset with technical details. Viper, the technology is charging up some kind of containment field. It's designed to prevent test subjects from leaving the area before the experiments are complete. You need to get clear of the area before it fully activates. Diego felt a chill as he realized that they might be the first test subjects to successfully escape from the technology's influence. The energy buildup suggested that the technology was preparing to prevent future escapes, possibly by creating a permanent barrier around the restricted airspace. As Diego continued to monitor the energy readings, he noticed that the technology was also scanning other aircraft in the area, possibly preparing to extend its influence to additional test subjects. The implications for military aviation were staggering. The technology could potentially ground entire air forces by interfering with their aircraft systems. Morrison's voice came through again with urgent information. Viper, the technology is planning to expand its test area. It's learning from your squadron's responses and preparing to conduct larger-scale experiments. You need to warn your command structure about the real scope of the threat. Diego realized that their encounter was just the beginning of a much larger phenomenon. The technology was apparently planning to expand its influence and conduct experiments on a massive scale, potentially affecting military operations worldwide. Sarah was maintaining manual control when she noticed that her navigation systems were finally showing consistent readings. According to her instruments, they were now clearly flying over familiar Nevada terrain, heading toward their home base. The transition back to normal reality was gradual but unmistakable. Her father's voice came through with confirmation. Sarah, you're successfully transitioning back to your original reality. The technology is losing its hold on you as you move away from the core phenomenon. Stay focused on getting home. Sarah felt a mixture of relief and sadness as her father's voice began to fade. The connection to her deceased father had been impossible but profoundly meaningful. The technology had given her something she had thought was lost forever, but at a cost that was too high to pay. Her father's voice came through one final time. Sarah, remember everything that happened here. The technology is real, and it's going to try to expand its influence. Your squadron's testimony might be the only way to prevent a larger catastrophe. Sarah realized that they had a responsibility to preserve their account of events and to warn others about the dangers of the technology. Their experience might be dismissed as hallucinations or equipment malfunction, but they had to try to prevent other pilots from being exposed to the same risks. As Sarah continued to fly toward home, she noticed that her aircraft was gradually returning to normal operation. The enhanced responsiveness and the connection to her thoughts were fading, leaving her with a standard F-16 that responded only to physical control inputs. The loss of the enhanced capabilities was disappointing, but Sarah was grateful to have her individual consciousness back. The technology had offered incredible abilities, but at the cost of her humanity and independence. Michael's heads-up display was gradually returning to normal operation, showing standard flight information instead of the impossible technical data about alien structures. The transition was like waking up from a vivid dream, leaving him with memories of incredible knowledge that was already beginning to fade. His grandfather's voice came through one final time. "Mickey, you made the right choice. The knowledge the technology offered was real, but it would have cost you your humanity. Remember what you learned about the importance of preserving human consciousness." Michael felt a profound sense of loss as his grandfather's voice faded. The connection to his deceased grandfather had been one of the most meaningful experiences of his life, but he understood that it had come at too high a price. The technology had been using his emotional connections to manipulate him. As Michael continued to monitor his instruments, he noticed that his thought processes were returning to normal. The enhanced analytical abilities were fading, but his creativity and intuition were returning. The trade-off was worth it. He was becoming human again. Michael realized that he had been given a glimpse of what human consciousness might become if it merged with advanced technology. The possibilities were incredible, but the cost was the loss of everything that made humans unique and valuable. The experience had taught him that some capabilities were not worth having if they came at the cost of human identity and independence. Technology should enhance human capabilities, not replace human consciousness. Robert was leading the squadron through their final approach to home base when he noticed that the collective consciousness effect was gradually fading. The shared thoughts and emotions of his squadron members were becoming less distinct, and his individual perspective was reasserting itself. Peterson's voice came through one final time. "Ace, you successfully resisted the collective consciousness integration. Your squadron is returning to individual operation, but they'll always have a connection to each other from this experience. Use that connection to support each other through what's coming next." Robert felt a mixture of relief and sadness as the collective consciousness faded. The shared experience had created a level of teamwork and understanding that exceeded anything he had experienced in his military career, but it had come at the cost of individual identity. As Robert continued to lead the formation, he noticed that although the collective consciousness was fading, there was still a subtle connection between the squadron members. They were operating as individuals again, but with an enhanced understanding of each other's thoughts and intentions. The experience had taught Robert that collective consciousness was possible, but that it should be chosen rather than imposed. The technology had demonstrated incredible capabilities, but it had also shown the importance of preserving individual identity and free will. Peterson's voice provided final guidance. Ace, when you debrief this mission, make sure your squadron sticks together. There will be people who try to separate you and alter your memories. Your collective testimony is your only protection. The squadron was approaching their home base when ground control, the real ground control, came through their radios with obvious relief. Flight of 6 F-16s, this is Edwards Tower. We have you on radar. You've been missing for over 3 hours. Are you experiencing any emergencies? Marcus responded with carefully chosen words. Edwards Tower, this is Hawk leading Flight of 6. We're all operational and requesting immediate landing. We have significant debrief material and need to speak with command immediately. The response from ground control was professional but concerned. Hawk, you're cleared for immediate landing. Emergency crews are standing by. Medical personnel are requested for post-flight evaluation. Marcus felt a surge of relief at hearing legitimate ground control communications. The contrast with the manipulative fake transmissions was stark. Real ground control was focused on their safety and operational status, not on emotional manipulation or personal information. As they approached the runway, Marcus could see emergency vehicles and personnel waiting for them. The level of response suggested that their disappearance had been taken seriously, and that their command structure was genuinely concerned about their welfare. Morrison's voice came through Marcus's headset one final time. Hawk, stick together during the debrief. Don't let them separate you or convince you that what you experienced wasn't real. Your squadron's testimony is crucial for preventing this from happening to others. Marcus felt a profound sense of gratitude toward Morrison, whether he was dead or alive, real or a manifestation of the technology. The guidance and warnings had helped them survive an encounter that could have cost them their lives and their sanity. The squadron landed safely at Edwards Air Force Base, but their ordeal was far from over. As they taxied to the parking area, Marcus could see that they were being met by a large group of personnel including medical staff, intelligence officers, and what appeared to be civilian contractors with recording equipment. The level of response suggested that their disappearance had been anticipated or that similar incidents had occurred before. The presence of civilian contractors was particularly concerning, as it suggested that their experience would be shared with non-military personnel. As they shut down their aircraft and prepared to disembark, Marcus made eye contact with each of his squadron members. The shared experience had created a bond between them that transcended normal military relationships. They had faced something beyond human understanding together, and they would face the consequences together. Jessica was the first to speak as they gathered near their aircraft. "Whatever happens in the debrief, we tell the truth. We stick together, and we don't let anyone convince us that what we experienced wasn't real." The other pilots nodded in agreement, understanding that their collective testimony was their only protection against attempts to discredit or suppress their account of events. They had been through something extraordinary together, and they would face the aftermath together. The debrief lasted for 18 hours, conducted by a team of military and civilian personnel who seemed to know more about the phenomena than they initially let on. The squadron members were questioned individually and together, their accounts recorded and analyzed in detail. During the individual questioning, attempts were made to suggest that their experiences had been hallucinations caused by equipment malfunction or psychological stress. The interrogators were skilled at creating doubt and confusion, but the squadron members maintained their accounts consistently. The civilian contractors were particularly interested in the technical aspects of their experience, asking detailed questions about the electronic warfare readings, the navigation anomalies, and the aircraft performance modifications. Their knowledge of the phenomena suggested that similar incidents had occurred before. When the squadron was finally allowed to compare notes, they discovered that their individual accounts were remarkably consistent. The details of their experiences matched closely, providing strong evidence that they had encountered something real rather than sharing mass hallucinations. The authorities eventually acknowledged that the squadron had encountered classified experimental phenomena, and that their accounts would be classified at the highest levels. They were warned that discussing their experience with unauthorized personnel would result in serious legal consequences. Despite the official acknowledgement, the squadron members sensed that the full truth was being concealed. The reluctance to provide details about the nature of the phenomena and the emphasis on secrecy suggested that the authorities were dealing with something they didn't fully understand or control. In the weeks following their encounter, the squadron members noticed subtle changes in themselves and their relationships. They maintained an enhanced awareness of each other's thoughts and emotions, a residual effect of the collective consciousness they had experienced. Their aircraft also exhibited subtle modifications that couldn't be explained by normal maintenance procedures. The F-16s responded more intuitively to their pilots' intentions, and their performance characteristics were slightly enhanced beyond normal specifications. The squadron members were eventually reassigned to different bases, officially for career development reasons, but clearly to prevent them from continuing to compare notes about their experience. Despite the separation, they maintained contact and continued to share information about their ongoing experiences. Marcus was assigned to a desk job at the Pentagon, where he had access to classified information about similar incidents. He discovered that their squadron was not the first to encounter the phenomena, and that the military had been studying the technology for several years. The classified reports revealed that the technology was not of human origin, and that attempts to reverse engineer it had been only partially successful. The military was continuing to conduct experiments with the technology, using volunteer pilots as test subjects. Marcus realized that their squadron had been selected for the experiment because of their experience and psychological profiles. They had been chosen specifically because they were likely to survive the encounter and provide useful data about the technology's effects on human consciousness. The knowledge that they had been deliberately exposed to dangerous experimental technology without their informed consent was deeply disturbing. Marcus began to understand that their experience was part of a larger program that was putting military personnel at risk for scientific advancement. Despite the official secrecy surrounding their encounter, Marcus felt a responsibility to document their experience and to warn others about the dangers of the technology. He began to compile a detailed account of their encounter, knowing that it might cost him his career, but believing that the truth was more important than his personal safety. Jessica was assigned to a training command, where she was responsible for preparing new pilots for advanced aircraft operations. Her experience with the alien technology gave her unique insights into the relationship between human consciousness and advanced aviation systems. Jessica noticed that some of the new pilots exhibited unusual abilities that reminded her of her own experience with the enhanced consciousness effects. When she investigated further, she discovered that these pilots had been selected for special training programs that involved exposure to classified technology. The revelation that the military was continuing to conduct experiments with the technology and that new pilots were being exposed to it without their knowledge confirmed Jessica's worst fears. The program was expanding, and more personnel were being put at risk. Jessica began to document the effects she observed in the new pilots, comparing their experiences to her own encounter with the alien technology. The patterns were unmistakable. The military was using the technology to enhance pilot capabilities, but without understanding the long-term consequences. Despite the risks to her career, Jessica felt compelled to warn the new pilots about what they were being exposed to. She began to share information about the technology's effects, hoping to help them understand and resist the more dangerous aspects of the enhancement process. Diego was assigned to an electronic warfare development program, where his experience with the alien technology made him valuable for analyzing captured enemy equipment. His enhanced understanding of exotic electronic signatures gave him capabilities that exceeded those of his colleagues. Diego's work brought him into contact with other personnel who had been exposed to the alien technology. He discovered that there was an informal network of military personnel who had encountered the phenomena and were struggling to understand its implications. The network shared information about ongoing experiments and the effects of exposure to the technology. Diego learned that the military was conducting multiple research programs related to the alien technology, each with different objectives and different levels of risk. Some of the programs were attempting to reverse engineer the technology for military applications, while others were focused on understanding its effects on human consciousness. The most disturbing programs were using the technology to enhance human capabilities without regard for the long-term consequences. Diego began to use his position to gather intelligence about the scope of the military's involvement with the alien technology. He discovered that the programs were far more extensive than he had initially realized, involving multiple branches of the military and civilian research organizations. The information Diego gathered painted a picture of a military establishment that was willing to take enormous risks with personnel safety in order to gain access to advanced technology. The ethical implications were staggering, and Diego felt compelled to document what he had learned. Sarah was assigned to a test pilot program, where her experience with enhanced aircraft performance made her valuable for evaluating new aviation technologies. Her ability to interface intuitively with advanced aircraft systems exceeded that of conventional test pilots. Sarah's work involved testing aircraft that incorporated elements of the alien technology. The enhanced performance characteristics were remarkable, but Sarah was aware of the risks involved in piloting aircraft that had been modified with incompletely understood technology. During her test flights, Sarah experienced brief returns of the enhanced consciousness effects she had encountered during the original incident. The aircraft seemed to respond to her thoughts and intentions, creating a level of pilot-aircraft integration that exceeded anything possible with conventional technology. Sarah realized that she was being used as a test pilot specifically because of her previous exposure to the alien technology. Her ability to interface with the enhanced aircraft systems made her valuable for evaluating the technology's potential military applications. Despite the exciting possibilities offered by the enhanced aircraft, Sarah was troubled by the ethical implications of using technology that could permanently alter human consciousness. She began to document her experiences, and to question the wisdom of continuing the research program. Michael was assigned to an aerospace engineering program, where his enhanced understanding of exotic physics made him valuable for analyzing the alien technology. His ability to intuitively understand the technology's operating principles exceeded that of conventional engineers. Michael's work involved attempting to reverse engineer the alien technology for military applications. The challenge was enormous, as the technology operated on principles that were only partially understood by human science. During his research, Michael discovered that the alien technology was far more advanced than the military had initially realized. The technology appeared to operate across multiple dimensions simultaneously, manipulating aspects of reality that human science had barely begun to understand. Michael's enhanced understanding of the technology made him one of the few people capable of making progress on the reverse engineering project. However, his growing understanding of the technology's capabilities also made him increasingly concerned about the wisdom of trying to adapt it for military use. The alien technology was clearly designed for purposes that exceeded human understanding. Attempting to use it for military applications without fully comprehending its capabilities and limitations could have catastrophic consequences. Michael began to document his concerns about the reverse engineering project, hoping to influence the decision-makers who were driving the research program. He believed that the technology was too dangerous to be used without a much deeper understanding of its implications. Robert was assigned to a command position, where his experience with collective consciousness effects made him valuable for developing new concepts of military operations. His understanding of enhanced teamwork and coordination exceeded that of conventional military leaders. Robert's work involved developing new doctrines for military operations that incorporated elements of the collective consciousness technology. The potential for enhanced coordination and decision-making was remarkable, but Robert was aware of the risks involved in implementing such technology. During his research, Robert discovered that the military was planning to field units that incorporated collective consciousness technology. The enhanced coordination and teamwork capabilities would revolutionize military operations, but the cost in terms of individual identity and free will was staggering. Robert realized that he was being used to develop operational concepts, specifically because of his previous exposure to the collective consciousness effects. His understanding of the technology's capabilities and limitations made him valuable for planning its military applications. Despite the potential military advantages offered by collective consciousness technology, Robert was deeply troubled by the ethical implications of using technology that could erase individual identity. He began to document his concerns and to question the wisdom of implementing such technology on a large scale. As the months passed, the 6 squadron members maintained contact despite their official separation. They shared information about their ongoing experiences and their growing understanding of the military's involvement with the alien technology. The picture that emerged was disturbing. A military establishment that was willing to sacrifice personnel safety and ethical principles in order to gain access to advanced technology. The programs were expanding, and more personnel were being exposed to dangerous experimental technology without their informed consent. The squadron members realized that they had a responsibility to document their experiences and to warn others about the dangers of the technology. They began to compile a comprehensive account of their encounter and its aftermath, knowing that it might cost them their careers, but believing that the truth was more important than their personal safety. Their account detailed not only their original encounter with the alien technology, but also the ongoing effects of their exposure and the military's continued use of the technology in experimental programs. The document represented a comprehensive indictment of the military's handling of the alien technology and its treatment of personnel. The squadron members knew that releasing their account would have serious consequences for their careers and possibly their personal safety. However, they believed that the public had a right to know about the existence of the alien technology and the risks associated with its military applications. After careful consideration, the squadron members decided to release their account through multiple channels simultaneously, making it impossible for the authorities to suppress the information completely. They understood that they would face serious legal consequences, but they believed that the importance of the information justified the risks. The release of their account created a sensation in military and civilian circles. The detailed description of their encounter with alien technology and their accusations about unethical military experimentation sparked intense debate about the government's handling of extraterrestrial phenomena. The authorities initially attempted to discredit the squadron members, suggesting that their account was the result of psychological stress or equipment malfunction. However, the consistency and detail of their testimony, combined with supporting evidence from other sources, made it difficult to dismiss their claims. The controversy surrounding their account led to congressional hearings and investigations into the military's handling of extraterrestrial technology. The squadron members testified under oath about their experiences, despite facing threats of prosecution for violating security regulations. Their testimony revealed the existence of extensive military programs involving alien technology, programs that had been conducted without proper oversight or ethical guidelines. The revelations sparked a national debate about the government's handling of extraterrestrial phenomena and the rights of military personnel. The squadron members paid a heavy price for their decision to go public with their account. They faced court-martial proceedings, loss of security clearances, and termination from military service. However, their sacrifice helped to expose the truth about the military's involvement with alien technology. Years later, the squadron members reflected on their experience and its aftermath. They had encountered something beyond human understanding, and their decision to share their story had changed the course of military research into extraterrestrial phenomena. Their account had forced the military to acknowledge the existence of alien technology and to implement ethical guidelines for research involving such technology. The programs continued, but with greater oversight and protection for personnel involved in experimental activities. The squadron members had lost their military careers, but they had gained something more valuable: the knowledge that they had done the right thing by speaking out against unethical experimentation and by sharing the truth about humanity's encounter with advanced extraterrestrial technology. Their story served as a reminder that individual courage and integrity could triumph over institutional secrecy, and that the truth, no matter how extraordinary, deserved to be told. The whisper from a fallen voice had led them to break radio silence and speak out against injustice, changing the course of history in the process.